I still wake up screaming some nights, my hands shaking as I reach for the bedside lamp. The doctors say writing it down might help, so here I am. But I warn you, what happened in Blackwood National Park in 1957 isn't your typical campfire story. I know because I was there. I was the one who found those bones. I was the one who went into that mine shaft, and I'm the only one who made it out alive. It started on a regular Tuesday morning in April. The air was crisp, and the trees were just starting to get their leaves back. As the head park ranger, I was doing my usual patrol when I spotted something that made my blood run cold. There in a small clearing lay a deer or what was left of it. But this wasn't your normal animal attack. No, this was different. The bones were arranged in a perfect circle, like someone had carefully placed each one. They were clean too, way too clean. No blood, no meat, nothing. Just white bones gleaming in the morning sun. In my 15 years as a ranger, I'd seen plenty of dead animals, but nothing like this. I crouched down to take a closer look, and that's when I noticed something else strange. The bones weren't weathered like they should be. They looked fresh, but they were white as chalk, like they'd been scrubbed clean by something or someone. I tried telling myself it was probably just some kids playing pranks, but deep down, I knew better. Kids don't clean bones like that. Kids don't arrange them in perfect patterns that make your eyes hurt if you look at them too long. I was about to radio back to headquarters when my walkie-talkie crackled to life first. It was Sarah, our park historian. Her voice was shaking. Mike, you need to come to the archive room right now. There's something you really need to see. I didn't know it then, but that call would be the beginning of the worst nightmare of my life. When I reached the archive room, Sarah was standing over an old table covered with black and white photographs. Her hands were trembling as she picked one up. Look at this, Mike, she whispered, handing me the photo. It's from 1927. My stomach dropped. The picture showed the exact same thing I'd just seen in the woods, deer bones arranged in a perfect circle. Even the pattern was identical. There's more, Sarah said, spreading out other photos. Every 30 years like clockwork. 1927, 1897, always in spring, always the same patterns. I picked up an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, 3 miners missing after strange animal sightings. The article mentioned bones found near the old Morrison mine, arranged in unusual patterns. The mine shut down in 1897, Sarah explained. The official story was that it flooded, but she pulled out an old diary. This belonged to Thomas Morrison himself. He wrote about hearing strange noises in the deepest tunnels, about workers going missing, about finding things that shouldn't exist. As she spoke, the lights in the archive room flickered. Through the window, I could see dark clouds rolling in, even though the morning had been clear just minutes ago. Mike, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper now. Whatever did this, it's been here a long time. And if the pattern holds true, it's active again. Just then, my radio crackled. Ranger Thorne? It was Jerry, one of my junior rangers. We just found another one, but this time it's not just deer bones. I felt my heart stop. What do you mean? We found a backpack, Jerry said. Belongs to one of the hikers reported missing last week. Sarah and I looked at each other. We both knew what I had to do next, find that old mine shaft. But as thunder rumbled outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me down there, something that had been waiting for a very long time. I grabbed my flashlight, radio, and emergency pack. The old mine entrance was marked on our park maps, though nobody had been there in years. With Sarah's directions and Jerry following close behind, we headed deep into the woods. The hike took 2 hours. The whole time I kept seeing things from the corner of my eye, shadows moving between trees, branches swaying without wind. Jerry saw them too. I could tell by the way he kept turning his head. When we found the entrance, it looked smaller than I expected. Just a dark hole in the hillside with rotting wooden supports. The smell hit us first, like old meat and wet stone. Our flashlight beams showed rusty tracks leading into the darkness. Look, Jerry whispered, pointing at the ground. There were marks in the dirt, long scratches, like something heavy had been dragged inside. Next to them lay a single hiking boot, caked with mud. My radio crackled, making us both jump. Sarah's voice came through, breaking up. Mike, found more records. Get out of there. It Hunts went. The radio went dead. Jerry's hands were shaking. Maybe we should wait for backup. I was about to agree when we heard it, a sound from deep in the mine, like bones clicking together, and something else, something that sounded almost like singing. That could be someone hurt down there, I said, but I didn't believe it. Every part of me was screaming to run, but I knew if there was even a chance of finding those missing hikers alive, I had to go in. I'll go first, I told Jerry. If I'm not back in an hour, get help. As I stepped into the mine shaft, the darkness seemed to swallow me whole. The clicking sound got louder, and with each step, the air got colder. I didn't know it then, but I was walking straight into its lair. The mine tunnel got narrower as I went deeper. My flashlight beam showed old support beams covered in something white. At first, I thought it was fungus, but then I realized they were tiny bones, thousands of them, worked into the wood like decorations. The clicking sound was louder now. It had a rhythm to it, like someone tapping out a song. The air was so cold my breath came out in clouds. That's when my flashlight caught something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The tunnel opened into a huge cave, and everywhere, on the walls, the floor, hanging from the ceiling, were bones. Not just deer bones anymore. I saw human skulls, ribcages, whole skeletons arranged in spiral patterns that seemed to move when you looked at them too long. In the center of it all was something I still can't fully describe. It looked almost human, but too tall, with arms, so many arms, made of different bones joined together. Its head was a deer skull, but wrong somehow, too big, with too many eye holes. And it was moving. It was building something. Those long bone arms were reaching out, picking up bones from piles around it, clicking them together like pieces in a puzzle. Then it stopped. The deer skull turned. It saw me. I tried to run. I really did. But my legs wouldn't move. The thing stood up. It just kept getting taller and taller. The bone arms reached out toward me, making that awful clicking sound. I could hear something that sounded like words coming from that skull, but not in any language I knew. My radio suddenly crackled to life. Jerry's voice cut through the cave. Mike, where are you? We heard screaming. That broke whatever spell was holding me. I turned and ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Behind me, I heard it coming, those bone arms scraping against the tunnel walls. That clicking sound getting closer and closer. I could see light ahead. The mine entrance. My lungs were burning. The clicking sounds were right behind me now. Something cold brushed against my neck, one of those bone arms reaching for me. Just as I thought I was going to make it, my foot caught on a track. I fell hard. Rolling over, I saw it looming above me, those empty eye sockets staring down. The bone arms spread wide, like a twisted version of a hug. That's when Jerry appeared at the entrance, holding a flare gun. He fired. The red light filled the tunnel, and the creature made a sound I'll never forget, like 1,000 bones breaking at once. It backed away from the light, giving me just enough time to scramble up and run. We didn't stop running until we reached the ranger station. Nobody believed our story, of course, but they couldn't ignore the missing hikers or the strange marks all over my jacket, marks that looked exactly like finger bones had gripped me. They sealed up the mine entrance with concrete the next day. Said it was for safety reasons. I quit my job as a ranger soon after. But sometimes, on spring nights, I still hear that clicking sound in my dreams. They found my ranger badge a week later, half buried in the dirt near the mine. It was twisted into a strange shape, like it had been woven into something else, and wrapped around it was a single white finger bone, polished smooth as glass. I know it's still down there in the dark, adding to his collection. And I know that in 30 years, when the time is right, concrete won't be enough to hold it. I still remember the screams. Not the normal kind, the ones you'd expect from someone who's hurt or scared. These were different. These screams sounded exactly like my own voice. But I should start from the beginning. My name is Sarah Chen, and until last month, I was a search and rescue expert with the Rocky Mountain Rescue Team. What happened in Echo Canyon changed everything. change me, and I need to write it all down before they declare me unfit for duty, or worse, completely crazy. It started with a normal rescue call, if you can call any missing persons case normal. 5 hikers had returned from their weekend trip. No big deal, right? We get cases like this all the time. Usually it's just some lost tourists who wandered off trail, or a twisted ankle slowing down the group. But something felt off from the moment I stepped into that helicopter with Mike. Maybe it was the way the clouds hung too low over the canyon that morning, or how the radio kept cutting out with this weird static. Mike noticed it too. I could tell by the way he kept adjusting his headset, frowning like he was hearing something that shouldn't be there. Getting some strange interference, he said, tapping his radio. Sounds almost like voices. I wish I had paid more attention to his words, because maybe then, just maybe, Mike would still be alive, and I wouldn't be sitting here, my hands shaking as I write this, trying to convince myself that what happened in those caves was real. But I know it was. The creature made sure of that. But to understand the horror of what we found, you need to know exactly how it all unfolded. And believe me, this is one story I wish I was making up. The helicopter ride that morning started like any other rescue mission. Mike and I scanned the ground below, looking for any sign of our missing hikers. Echo Canyon stretched out beneath us like a giant crack in the earth, its walls rising up hundreds of feet on both sides. There, I pointed to a clearing. I see their campsite. Mike landed the helicopter in a nearby flat spot, and that's when things started feeling weird. The air was too quiet. No birds, no wind in the trees, nothing. Just dead silence. The campsite looked like everyone had vanished in the middle of whatever they were doing. A pot of coffee still sat on the portable stove, half full and ice cold. 5 backpacks were lined up neatly against a fallen log. Sleeping bags lay unzipped but empty inside the tents. "Sarah, come look at this," Mike called out. He was holding the camcorder he found inside one of the tents. The little red light was blinking. It still had some battery left. My hands felt sweaty as I pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing one of the hikers, a young guy with glasses, filming around their campfire the night before. "Day 2 of our Echo Canyon adventure," he was saying, but then the camera shook and everyone went quiet. Someone in the background whispered, "Did you hear that?" The camera turned toward the darkness beyond their fire, and that's when I heard it, a voice calling out from the shadows. A voice that sounded exactly like the guy holding the camera. "Hello, is anyone there?" The voice called from the darkness, but the guy with the camera was right there on screen, his mouth shut tight in fear. Mike and I looked at each other. My stomach felt like it was full of ice. "We need to call for backup," I said, but when Mike tried his radio, all we got was static. And buried in that static, I could have sworn I heard voices. Our voices, calling back to us. We had to find those hikers. The video shook me up, but I've been doing rescue work long enough to know that panic doesn't help anyone. Mike and I decided to follow the trail leading away from the camp. That's when we started hearing them, voices calling out from different directions. They sounded exactly like real people calling for help. But something was off. The voices kept changing, like someone trying on different masks. First, it was a woman crying, then a man shouting, then, most disturbing of all, my own voice echoing back at us. "Mike, stay close," I whispered. The canyon walls seemed to be closing in around us. Our flashlight beams bounced off the rocky walls, creating weird shadows that moved when they shouldn't. We found the first real clue near a narrow crack in the canyon wall, a torn backpack with a camera strap still attached. Fresh scratch marks covered the rocks nearby. They looked like claw marks, but bigger than any animal I'd ever seen in these mountains. "Sarah," Mike's voice shook as he pointed his flashlight into the crack. "There's something in there." I leaned forward to look, and that's when everything went wrong. A sound came from deep inside the crack, a perfect copy of Mike's voice calling my name. But Mike was right next to me, frozen in fear. Before I could grab him, something shot out of the darkness. I couldn't see it clearly, just a flash of pale, stretchy flesh. It wrapped around Mike's waist like a giant hand. "Sarah." This time it was really him screaming. I reached for him, our fingers almost touching. But the thing was too strong, too fast. It yanked him into the crack with a horrible crunching sound. The last thing I heard was Mike's scream, cut off suddenly by what sounded like rocks grinding together. Then silence. Nothing but my own panicked breathing and the faint echo of what was definitely not Mike's voice, calling my name from the darkness. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. Tears blurred my vision as I sprinted back toward the helicopter. But I knew I couldn't leave, not with 5 hikers and Mike still missing. I had to find out what that thing was. My flashlight beam caught something strange on the canyon wall, a hidden opening, barely wide enough for a person. The rocks around it were smooth, worn down like something had been sliding in and out for years. I took a deep breath and clicked on my backup radio. Static. But in that static, I could hear them all now. Mike, the hikers, and dozens of other voices. Some sounded ancient, like they'd been trapped here for years. The cave tunnel went deep into the mountain. The floor was covered with something sticky, and the walls. Oh God, the walls were lined with bones. Human bones picked clean and broken open. Some looked fresh. My light caught something moving ahead, something pale and stretchy, like living clay. It could fold itself flat against the walls or stretch out like rubber. And all over its surface, I saw what looked like human mouths, opening and closing, each one speaking in a different voice. I found the missing hiker's cameras scattered around its nest. This thing had been hunting here for years, using stolen voices to lure people closer. And now it had Mike too. That's when I remembered the dynamite in my rescue pack. We carried it for clearing avalanche zones, but now I had a different use for it. The creature was smart enough to copy our voices, but it didn't understand what I was doing as I set the charges. It just kept calling out to me, using the voices of everyone it had taken, trying to trick me into coming closer. I knew what I had to do, and I knew I probably wasn't making it out of that cave. I set the charges quickly in the main cave chamber, my hands shaking. The creature was getting closer. I could feel it sliding along the walls, its many mouths whispering with familiar voices. Sarah, help me. Mike's voice called from behind. Honey, I'm hurt. My dad's voice echoed from another direction, a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years. But I kept working. This thing had killed too many people. The mountains weren't safe while it lived. When I placed the last charge, I heard movement above me. The creature dropped from the ceiling like melting wax, spreading out to block every escape route. Its pale flesh rippled with faces I recognized. Mike, the hikers, and others I didn't know. I held up the detonator. You might be smart enough to steal our voices, I said, but you don't understand what this is, do you? It reached for me with long, stretchy arms. I pressed the button. The explosion shook the whole mountain. The last thing I remember was the cave ceiling coming down and the creature's screams. Not copied voices this time, but its own real sound. Like 1,000 pieces of chalk screeching on a blackboard all at once. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. They found me half buried in rocks near the cave entrance. Most people don't believe my story about what happened in Echo Canyon. They blame shock or head trauma from the cave-in. But I know what I saw, and I know what I did. Sometimes at night, I still hear those voices calling, but they're getting fainter now. And the mountains are quiet again, except for the normal sounds, wind, birds, and hikers enjoying the trails safely. Just don't go near that collapsed cave in Echo Canyon. And if you ever hear your own voice calling from the darkness, run. I feel the icy grip of fear every time I close my eyes. What happened on Mount Baker that day wasn't natural. I'm Jeff Roberts, and after 15 years of mountain rescue, I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for what we found in that blizzard. The thing that turned my teammates into human ice sculptures, that took 3 of my fingers and left me with nightmares that never end. It started with an urgent call at 2 a.m. on December 15, 1996. A rescue team of 5 hadn't returned from searching for lost hikers. With a massive storm rolling in, dispatch was desperate. They called me because I knew every inch of that mountain. What I didn't know was that I was leading my team straight into a trap. Jeff, you sure about this? Mike Chen, my second in command, asked as we geared up in the ranger station. Outside, the wind howled like a hungry animal. Weather saying this could be the storm of the century. I pulled on my heavy gloves, hiding my shaking hands. I wish I'd listened to that hint of fear in Mike's voice. Those are our people up there. We go now, or we don't find them at all. Our team of 6 loaded up the snowcats. Sarah, our medic, the Thompson twins, our best climbers, Mike, and young Andy on his first major rescue. None of us knew that in just 12 hours, I'd be the only one left alive. The snowstorm hit harder than anything I'd seen in my 15 years on the mountain. Our headlamps barely cut through the white darkness as we trudged higher. The wind was so loud we had to shout to hear each other, even standing close. Visibility's dropping to 0, Mike called out, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. How much further? I checked my GPS, squinting at the screen through the swirling snow. Their last known position is about half a mile up, near Palmer's Ridge. Sarah tapped my shoulder, pointing ahead. Jeff, look. Is that light? Through the whiteness, a faint blue glow flickered. It wasn't like any emergency light or flare I knew. It looked wrong. Cold. Like the kind of light you might see deep underwater. The Thompson twins moved closer together. Even Andy, usually chatty, had gone quiet. Something about that light made my stomach turn. Stay close, I ordered, fighting down the urge to turn back. Check your radios. If anyone sees anything, and I mean anything, call it in. We formed a tight line, roped together. The blue light seemed to dance away as we got closer, like it was leading us somewhere. The temperature dropped so fast our breath froze in front of our faces. That's when we found them, the first rescue team. And nothing in my training could have prepared me for what we saw. The bodies stood frozen in a perfect circle, like some twisted work of art. All 5 members of the missing team, their faces locked in expressions of pure terror. Ice covered them like glass, but something was wrong. The ice seemed to come from inside them, pushing out through their skin. Dear God, Sarah whispered, her medical training kicking in. This isn't possible. They're completely frozen solid. Andy threw up in the snow. I couldn't blame him. The victim's eyes were open, cloudy with frost, but somehow still looking at something above them. Their equipment's intact, Mike noted, checking the nearest body. No signs of avalanche or falling. They just stopped here and froze. Then we saw the tracks in the snow. Not human tracks. They were long, like someone had dragged a wide rake through the snow. But they came from nowhere and disappeared into nowhere. The radio crackled, just static at first. Then a sound that made my blood run cold, like ice cracking, but mixed with something that could have been breathing. We need to move, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Now. That's when the Thompson twins screamed. Above us, something pale and tall swayed in the blizzard, something that shouldn't exist. We ran. Running split us up. The blizzard was so thick I could barely see who was in front or behind me. The twins were gone first, their screams cut off like someone had flipped a switch. Then Andy disappeared into the white without a sound. Sarah, Mike! I yelled until my throat was raw. The wind carried back Mike's voice. Jeff, over here. I followed his shouts, but something was wrong with them. They sounded hollow. When I found him, I understood why. Mike stood perfectly still, ice creeping up his legs. His eyes were wide with fear. Don't let it touch you, he gasped. The ice was spreading inside him, his skin turning clear like glass. I reached for him, but he screamed, run. Behind him, I saw it clearly for the first time. Tall and white as the snow, with arms too long and fingers like icicles. Its face, if you could call it that, was smooth and empty except for 2 black holes where eyes should be. Sarah appeared from the white, running toward us. The creature moved like lightning. One of its long arms stretched out, barely touching her shoulder. I watched in horror as frost spread across her body in seconds, freezing her from the inside out. The thing turned those black holes toward me. My legs would move. All I could think was, this is how I die. I don't remember how I escaped. The cold hit me first, a burning feeling like nothing I'd ever felt. My fingers and toes stopped working. Ice crystals formed in my eyes, but somehow I kept moving. The creature chased me down the mountain. Each time I looked back, it was closer, those long arms reaching. The blizzard seemed to move with it, like it was part of the storm itself. I fell, tumbled down a slope. My leg snapped. I heard it crack. The pain barely registered through the cold. When I tried to get up, my fingers broke off like twigs. They were frozen solid. The thing loomed over me. Those black holes for eyes seemed to pull me in. I thought about Mike, Sarah, the twins, Andy, all frozen forever on this mountain. This was it. I closed my eyes. Then something happened I still can't explain. The sun broke through the clouds, just for a moment. But in that flash of light, the creature screamed. A sound like breaking ice. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. I dragged myself through the snow for hours. By the time the rescue team found me, I'd lost 3 fingers, 2 toes, and part of my left ear to frostbite. The doctor said it was a miracle I survived. They found the others exactly where I left them, frozen in place, perfect ice statues in the snow. But when they tried to recover the bodies, something strange happened. They melted, not like normal ice, but like they dissolved into the air, leaving nothing behind. The official report called it a weather anomaly. They blamed the deaths on hypothermia and extreme conditions. Nobody wanted to talk about the strange tracks or how bodies don't freeze from the inside out. I spent 6 months in the hospital. The nightmares came every night. Those black, empty eyes, the sound of ice cracking like bones. Even now, years later, I wake up sometimes with frost on my windows, even in summer. I quit mountain rescue, moved to Arizona where it never snows. But I know it's still up there, waiting in the white darkness. Every winter, more hikers go missing on Mount Baker. They never find the bodies. And sometimes late at night when it's very quiet, I hear that sound on my radio, ice cracking, and something breathing in the static. I know one thing for sure. Whatever's up there isn't natural. It's not a weather anomaly. It's something that's been there a long time, maybe forever, hunting in the storms, and it's still hungry. Last month, I went back to Mount Baker. I had to know if I was crazy, if my mind had made it all up. I stood at the base, staring up at the snowy peaks where I lost my team. A park ranger approached me. She looked worried. "You're Jeff Roberts, aren't you?" she asked. "The one from '96. I nodded. "You should know," she whispered, looking around. "Last week, we found another circle. 5 hikers, frozen solid, just like in your report." My hands started shaking. Above us, storm clouds gathered. I could have sworn I saw something tall and white moving in the distance, watching us. The ranger grabbed my arm. "There's more." Before they melted, we took pictures. The ice, it had patterns in it, like something was growing inside them. I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could. But I know the truth now. I'm not crazy, and that thing is getting bolder, hungrier. If you're ever hiking in the mountains and a blizzard rolls in, listen carefully. If you hear ice cracking like footsteps or see a blue light in the storm, run. Run as fast as you can, because the White Death is real, and it's still hunting. I wasn't supposed to be working that night, but when dispatch called about more dead cattle at Miller's farm, I knew something was wrong, really wrong. The kind of wrong that makes your stomach twist into knots. My name's Thomas Blackwood, and I've been a ranger on the Blackfeet Reservation for 15 years. I've seen bears tear through livestock and wolves take down elk. But this was different. 4th one this month, my partner Jim said, crouching next to what was left of a cow. The animal looked like it had been sucked dry from the inside, like some giant spider had drained it. There wasn't a drop of blood anywhere in the snow. I pulled my jacket tighter against the January wind. Something about this case brought back memories of my grandmother's stories, tales she used to tell about ancient spirits that came down from the mountains in winter, hungry spirits that could empty a man like a juice box. "Check this out, Thomas," Jim called. He was standing by a big pine tree, pointing at something carved into the bark. I walked over and felt my heart skip a beat. Strange symbols covered the trunk, giving off a sickly green glow in the fading light. They weren't there yesterday during our patrol. "We should head back," I said, trying to ignore the way those symbols seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. "Get some back about here." But Jim just stood there, staring at the markings like he was in some kind of trance. When he finally turned to look at me, something in his eyes made my blood run cold. "Don't you hear it?" he whispered. "The sinning?" All I could hear was the wind howling through the trees. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of something terrible, something that would change both our lives forever. Over the next few days, things got worse. More dead animals showed up, not just cows anymore. We found deer and elk too, all dried up like leather. But what really scared me was how they were arranged, in perfect circles, like someone had placed them there on purpose. Jim wasn't himself either. My partner used to joke around, always telling stories to make our patrols go faster. Now he barely spoke. I'd catch him staring off into the darkness, muttering words I couldn't understand. Sometimes he'd stand still for minutes, head tilted like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "The mountain is calling," he'd say in a voice that didn't sound like his own. "We need to go higher." I didn't want to go deeper into the forest, but I couldn't let Jim go alone. We hiked for hours through the snow until we found something that still gives me nightmares. It was a clearing where nothing looked right. Every tree was black and dead, even though they'd been fine last week. Hanging from the branches were dozens of animal bodies, all dried up like the others. The air felt wrong too, heavy and cold in a way that had nothing to do with winter. In the middle of it all stood a pile of rocks that looked like some kind of altar. Those same glowing symbols from the tree were carved all over it. My grandmother's warnings about sacred places echoed in my head, telling me to run. But Jim walked toward it like a sleepwalker. "It's so beautiful," he whispered. "Can't you feel it, Thomas? The power here?" I grabbed his arm to pull him back. His skin felt ice cold through his jacket. "Jim, we need to leave. Now." He turned to look at me, and I stumbled backward. His eyes had gone completely black, like empty holes in his face. That's when I knew we'd stayed too long. Whatever lived on this mountain had found us, and it wasn't going to let us go. I'll never forget what happened next. Jim touched the altar, and everything went quiet, the kind of quiet you get right before a storm hits. Then he screamed. His body bent backward like a rubber band. When he looked at me again, his face wasn't his anymore. Something ancient and hungry stared out through those black eyes. "The Wendigo wakes," he said, but it wasn't Jim's voice. It sounded like ice cracking and wind howling all at once. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I watched in horror as Jim changed. His skin split open like an old jacket bursting at the seams. He grew taller, his arms and legs stretching like taffy. His mouth opened wider and wider until his jaw didn't look human anymore, filled with teeth sharp as needles. The thing that used to be my partner towered over me now, at least 12 feet tall. Its head had antlers like a deer, but twisted and wrong. The smell coming off, it was like rotten meat left in the sun. "Jim," I whispered, "if you're still in there." The monster roared, its breath so cold it frosted my glasses. That's when I knew for sure. My friend Jim was gone. Whatever was wearing his skin now was something from my grandmother's darkest stories. I did the only thing I could do. I ran, my legs burned as I ran through the snow. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the trees, getting closer with each step. The worst part was when it started using Jim's voice. "Thomas, help me. Please," it called. Something's wrong with me. I wanted to stop. Every part of me wanted to help my friend, but I remembered my grandmother's warning. The Wendigo steals voices to trick its prey. Once it takes someone, they're gone forever. The snow got deeper as I ran up the mountain. My lungs felt like they were on fire. I knew I couldn't keep running much longer. Then I saw it, old Miller's hunting cabin, half buried in snow. I crashed through the door, frantically looking for anything I could use to defend myself. In the corner, I spotted Miller's ceremonial pipe, the one blessed by our tribe's medicine man. I grabbed it just as the cabin's door exploded inward. The monster that used to be Jim had to bend down to fit inside. Its antlers scraped the ceiling, and its long arms reached for me with claws like black icicles. "I'm sorry," I whispered, gripping the pipe. My grandmother had told me sacred objects could fight evil spirits, but at a terrible price. What happened next was like a nightmare. The creature's claws ripped into my shoulder as I pressed the pipe against its chest. It screamed, not with Jim's voice anymore, but with a sound like winter itself. The air turned so cold my tears froze on my face. But I held on. I had to, for Jim. When it was over, all that remained was a pile of blackened bones and Jim's ranger badge in the ashes. I slid down against the wall, bleeding and shaking, knowing I'd lost my best friend to something that shouldn't exist in our world. But it did exist, and I was the only one left to tell the story. That was 15 years ago. I never went back to being a ranger after that night. The official report says Jim died in a hiking accident. Nobody would believe the truth anyway. My shoulder still aches where the Wendigo's claws got me, especially when winter comes. The scars are a reminder that some stories aren't just stories. These days, I work at the local library. When hikers come in asking about trails near Wendigo Peak, I tell them about dangerous cliffs and bad weather. Most listen. Some don't. Every winter, I hear about missing people up there. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind blows down from the mountain, I swear I can hear Jim's voice calling me back to that grove. But I know better now. I do what my grandmother taught me. Burn sage, say the old prayers, and keep watch. Someone has to remember what happened. Someone has to warn others. Because the Wendigo is still up there waiting. And it's always hungry. Every year, I visit Jim's empty grave and leave tobacco. Not for the thing he became, but for the friend he was. And I pray that his spirit found peace, even if his body never did. Some nights I wake up in a cold sweat, thinking about that altar in the woods. Wondering if those symbols are still glowing, calling to someone else. Wondering if I could have saved Jim if I'd known what was happening sooner. But you can't change the past. You can only protect the future. That's why I'm telling you this story now. Because sometimes the monsters in our grandparents' stories are real, and sometimes they're still hunting. I still wake up screaming some nights, my hands instinctively reaching for the rough cave walls that aren't there anymore. The doctors say I'm safe now, but they don't know what I brought back with me. What's growing in their lab right now? Let me start from the beginning. I'm Dr. Emma Torres, and I've been rescuing people from caves for 15 years. I've seen every kind of accident, every kind of panic, every kind of darkness, or at least I thought I had. It started with a call at 3 a.m. last Tuesday. 3 spelunkers had gone missing in the Blackridge Cave system, a newly discovered network that wasn't even on most maps yet. They'd been underground for 48 hours, well past their check-in time. I should have known something was wrong when I heard the local rescue team refuse to go back in after their first search attempt. They just quit. I remember asking the park ranger over the phone. Said something spooked them, he replied, his voice shaky. Found some weird markings on the walls. Blood, they said, but that's impossible. Nothing big enough to leave that much blood lives in these caves. I was on a helicopter within the hour. My team met me at the cave entrance. Mike, our medical officer with his oversized first aid kit. Sarah, the geologist who'd mapped more caves than anyone I knew. And the Rodriguez twins, Tom and Tim, our best rescue specialists. The cave mouth looked like any other, a dark slash in the mountainside. But standing there, watching our headlamp beams disappear into that absolute darkness, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my first cave rescue. Pure, primal fear. If only I'd listened to that feeling. If only I'd known what was waiting for us down there in the deep dark. The first 100 feet of descent felt normal enough. Our headlamps cut through the darkness as we followed the main tunnel down. The limestone walls were slick with moisture, and our boots made soft squishing sounds in the mud. I led the way, checking our guide rope as we went deeper. Then Sarah called out, "Emma, look at this." Her light beam trembled slightly as she pointed to the wall. My stomach dropped. Long, dark streaks ran down the rocky surface. At first, I tried telling myself it was just rust deposits. Caves have those all the time, but rust doesn't drip, and rust doesn't smell like copper. Blood, Mike whispered, touching it with a gloved finger, still wet. Above the streaks were marks I'll never forget. 5 parallel lines carved deep into solid rock, like something with claws had been desperately trying to climb the walls. Whatever made them had to be strong, really strong. We found the first backpack shortly after. It was torn to shreds, its contents scattered across the cave floor. A broken headlamp, a crushed water bottle, a camera with its screen smashed. That's when we heard it, a sound that didn't belong in any cave I'd ever been in, like someone dragging something heavy across rock, followed by a weird clicking noise. It echoed from somewhere in the darkness ahead. Tom grabbed my arm. What was that? Maybe it's one of the missing spelunkers, Sarah suggested, but her voice shook. I've been in enough caves to know when something's not right. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn back, but there were 3 people down here somewhere that needed us. We keep going, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. But stay close. And nobody, I mean nobody, wanders off alone. If I'd known what was waiting for us deeper in that cave, I would have run right then and never looked back. We found the first body about an hour later. I won't describe it in detail. Some things are better left unsaid. But I will say this. Whatever killed that poor spelunker wasn't interested in their equipment or valuables. It was hungry. That's when we saw them. I was checking the body for any ID when my headlamp caught movement in the darkness. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on me, but then Tim's light beam swept across it too. A pale, human-like shape, crawling sideways along the cave wall like a spider. "Don't move," I whispered. The creature turned its head toward us. Where eyes should have been, there was just smooth white skin. Its nose was almost flat, with wide, flaring nostrils. But its mouth, God, its mouth was full of teeth like needles. It made that clicking sound again, like a dolphin's echolocation. That's when it hit me. These things hunted by sound. More clicking noises echoed from different directions. There wasn't just one. There were many. "Back up," I breathed. Slowly, no sudden moves. But Tom panicked. He turned to run, his boots scraping against the rock floor. The creature's head snapped toward the sound. What happened next happened so fast. A blur of pale flesh, a scream cut short, and Tom was just gone. Dragged into a crack in the wall we hadn't even noticed. Tim screamed his brother's name and ran after him. Sarah tried to grab him, but he was too quick. More clicking, more screams, then silence. We'd lost 2 people in less than a minute, Mike, Sarah, and I pressed our backs against the wall, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. In the beam of my headlamp, I could see tears running down Sarah's face. We weren't the rescuers anymore. We were the prey. The next few hours were a nightmare of hide and seek. We learned fast. Any loud noise meant death. We took off our boots, moving in just our socks. We turned off our headlamps and used only the dimmest setting on one light, keeping it pointed at the ground. Mike figured out something important. "They're blind," he whispered, "but they can feel vibrations, like bats with their clicking." Sarah nodded. "That's why they survived down here. They evolved in the dark." We found more bodies, not just the spelunkers, but older ones too. These creatures had been hunting here for years. Nobody had ever made it back to report them. Then we lost Mike. He was right behind us, I swear. But when Sarah and I stopped to check our route, he was gone. No scream, no warning, just gone, like the darkness had swallowed him whole. We heard the feeding sounds echo through the cave. Sarah started crying again, but silently. I grabbed her hand and squeezed it. We had to keep moving. That's when we stumbled into their nest. The cave opened into a huge room, our dim light barely showing its edges. The floor was covered in bones, hundreds of them, and hanging from the ceiling were things, like wet, pale cocoons. Some were moving. "Eggs," Sarah whispered. "They're breeding." A chorus of clicks answered her whisper. They were all around us now, closing in. Sarah looked at me, then at the tunnel behind her. I knew what she was thinking. One of us would have to distract them while the other ran. Before I could stop her, she grabbed a rock and threw it far into the cave. The clicking sounds followed it. "Run," she mouthed at me. I did, and I hate myself every day for doing it. I ran until my lungs burned. The clicking sounds seemed to come from everywhere. In my panic, I almost missed the glow, a tiny spot of daylight far above, a shaft leading to the surface. But the shaft was narrow, too narrow for an adult. Unless I still had the rescue team's explosives in my pack. One blast could widen it enough, but the noise would bring every creature in the cave. I had no choice. With shaking hands, I set the charge. As I reached for the detonator, my backpack shifted. Something inside it moved. No time to check. The clicking was getting closer. I hit the trigger and pressed myself against the wall. The explosion was deafening. Rocks showered down. The creatures shrieked, a sound I'll never forget. They came at me from every direction, pale bodies scrambling over each other, mouths open wide. I grabbed the lowest part of the shaft and pulled myself up as clawed hands grabbed at my legs. I climbed faster than I've ever climbed in my life. Behind me, the creatures followed, their claws scratching the rock. But they were too big for the narrow shaft. They couldn't follow. When I reached the surface, I lay there in the sunlight, gasping. I'd made it. That was 3 days ago. This morning, the lab called. They found something in my backpack, 3 smooth, pale eggs that had gotten caught in my gear during the escape. They were excited about their discovery. Last night, the eggs started hatching. And somewhere deep underground, in that dark cave, more eggs are waiting. Hundreds of them, just waiting to hatch. I still wake up screaming some nights, the memories of what happened in that valley haunting me like a shadow that won't go away. My name is James Sosi, and I've been tracking animals on the Navajo Reservation for 20 years. But what I found in the winter of 1943 wasn't any normal animal, not even close. It started with the missing cattle. 3 more had vanished from Old Man Wilson's ranch that morning. I crouched in the frost-covered dirt, studying tracks that made my stomach turn. See, I can read stories in the ground. It's what I do. But these tracks told a story that didn't make sense. They started as normal cow hoof prints, then changed right in the middle of a step. Changed into something walking on 2 legs, with toes too long and bent to be human. The elders in my tribe had warned me about creatures like this since I was a kid. Skinwalkers, they called them. I always thought they were just scary stories meant to keep children from wandering off at night. I should have listened. Mr. Sosi. Tom Wilson's shout broke through my thoughts. The old rancher was walking toward me with 3 other men. I knew most of them. Jack Martinez, the deputy sheriff with his shiny badge and nervous eyes. Mike Running Bear, another tracker I'd worked with before. And a new face, David Cooper, some wildlife expert from the city who looked like he'd never spent a night in the wild. Tom's face was pale as he reached me. 4 more cattle missing from the north pasture, he said, wringing his hands. And Ben and Sarah Hayes haven't been seen since yesterday morning. I felt the chills sink deeper into my bones. The Hayes were good people. Ben had helped me fix my truck last summer, and Sarah always brought extra food to community gatherings. If something had happened to them. I looked back at the strange tracks in the dirt, then up at the red cliffs looming over us. Somewhere up there, something was hunting. And now it wasn't just taking cattle anymore. Looking back, I wish I'd walked away right then. But I didn't know what we were really dealing with. None of us did. And by the time we figured it out, it was already too late. We split into pairs to cover more ground. I went with Mike up toward the Hayes cabin, while the others checked the north pasture. The morning sun was bright, but didn't give any warmth. Everything was too quiet. No birds singing, no wind in the trees. Just our boots crunching in the frost. The Hayes cabin looked wrong as soon as we saw it. No smoke from the chimney, even though it was freezing. No footprints around the door. Not even their dog was around, and that old mutt always came running when anyone showed up. My hand shook a little as I pushed the door open. The inside of the cabin hit me like a punch to the gut. Chairs were knocked over. The table was broken. Deep scratches ran down the walls like something had tried to climb them. And the floor, there were dark stains that I knew had to be blood. James, Mike's voice came from the bedroom, barely a whisper. You need to see this. On the bedroom wall, someone, or something, had written 3 words in blood. Wear your skin. My radio crackled, making us both jump. James, Jack's voice trembled through the static. Get to the North Ridge. Quick. We ran, found Jack and the others standing under a big pine tree, all staring up. What I saw there will haunt me forever. 2 bodies hanging from the branches, but wrong. The skin was gone, peeled off like you'd skin a rabbit. I recognized Ben's red hair, saw Sarah's wedding ring glinting in the sun. We need to get help, David said, his face green. Call in the state police, the FBI, somebody. But I knew better. Whatever did this wasn't something the police could handle. The tracks I found, the way the bodies were, prepared. This was something old, something that my people had warned about for generations. And as the sun started to set, painting the cliffs blood red, I realized with horrible certainty that it knew we were here. None of us wanted to be out there after dark, but the steep cliffs made it too dangerous to hike back. We set up camp, built a fire, and tried not to stare at the shadows moving between the trees. I watched my companions closely. Something felt off. Tom, usually a chatty guy, hadn't said a word in hours. David kept scratching his arms like his skin was itchy, and Mike, when the firelight hit his eyes, they seemed to glow in a way that wasn't natural. The attack came at midnight. I woke up to screaming. Tom's tent was in shreds, blood everywhere. Through the moonlight, I saw something moving. It looked like a person, but all wrong. The way it moved was jerky, like a puppet with tangled strings. And its face, it was wearing Tom's face, but it didn't fit right. David grabbed his rifle and shot at it. The thing changed shape right in front of us. Suddenly, Sarah Hayes was standing there, looking perfectly normal except for her smile. "Please help me," she said, sounding exactly like Sarah. Then her jaw opened way too wide, showing rows of sharp teeth. We'd all ran in different directions. In the chaos, I lost sight of David. Later, we found Jack's body in the snow. Like the haze, his skin was gone. Now it was just me and Mike, hiding in a cave, watching each other. The terrible truth hit me. The creature could look like any of us now. I remembered what my grandmother used to tell me about skinwalkers. They could be killed, but you had to know their real name. And somewhere nearby, they always kept a piece of their original skin. Mike spoke up. "We should split up," he said. "Cover more ground." I nodded, but before we separated, I did something I hadn't told him about. While he wasn't looking, I marked his jacket with a special symbol my grandmother taught me. If Mike was the skinwalker, that mark would burn. I didn't want to believe it could be him. But in that moment, I didn't trust anyone, not even myself. I headed back to the Hayes cabin alone. The sun was setting, making everything look blood red. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Something pulled me toward their cellar. I'd helped Ben build it last summer, but now the entrance looked different. Behind some loose boards, I found a hidden crack in the wall, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. The smell hit me first, like rotten meat and old leather. My flashlight beam showed me something that made me almost throw up. Hanging on the walls were pieces of skin, dozens of them. Some looked ancient, dried up like old paper. Others were fresh. Then I saw it, a patch of skin with a tattoo I knew all too well. Mike had shown me that same tattoo just last week, a traditional design he'd gotten to honor his grandfather. But here it was, hanging on the wall. The real Mike must have been dead for days. My radio crackled. "James?" Mike's voice came through. "Found anything?" I clicked the radio off, my hands shaking. The thing I'd been traveling with wasn't Mike at all. The mark I put on his jacket earlier, it should have burned him if he was the skinwalker. But what if these creatures were smarter than my grandmother had thought? What if they could hide their true nature, even from the old magic? A floorboard creaked behind me. "Find what you're looking for, friend." It was Mike's voice, but now it sounded wrong, like someone trying to play a song on an instrument they'd never seen before. I turned around slowly, gripping the piece of his real skin in my hand. He stood in the cellar doorway, blocking the last of the daylight, and he was smiling with too many teeth. What happened next is still a blur. The thing wearing Mike's face changed as it came at me. 1 second it was Mike, then Sarah Hayes, then Tom, then something I can't even describe. Its skin rippled like water, faces melting into each other. I spoke the words my grandmother taught me, holding up the piece of skin with Mike's tattoo. The creature screamed, not with one voice, but with many. It charged at me like a wild animal. We fought in that dark cellar. It was stronger than any human, faster too. I shot it twice with my blessed bullets, but the wounds just closed up. It kept coming, backing me toward the cellar entrance and up toward the cliffs. I knew then what I had to do. When it charged again, I didn't move away. Instead, I grabbed it tight and let its momentum carry us both over the cliff's edge. As we fell, I pressed the skin against its chest and said the final words of the ancient prayer. The creature burst into black flames. Its screech echoed through the valley as we plummeted toward the rocks below. That's the last thing I remember. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. They said it was a miracle I survived the fall. The official report blamed mountain lions for all the deaths. Nobody wanted to believe what really happened. I thought it was over. I really did. But last week, I saw the new deputy in town. He waved at me, friendly as could be. Then his sleeve rolled up a bit, and I saw it, Mike's tattoo, perfect in every detail. I don't sleep much these days, and I always keep a bag packed, ready to run. Because sometimes the monsters don't stay dead. Sometimes they come back wearing the faces of people you used to know. And sometimes they remember who caught them the first time. I still remember that awful night in February 1965. The moon hung huge and bright in the dark sky, casting blue shadows across the snow. As a forest ranger, I'd seen plenty of dead animals before, but nothing like this. My truck's headlights lit up another dead wolf lying in the snow. That made 7 this week. Something was very wrong here. Usually when wolves die, you can see why. They're either hurt, sick, or starving. But this one looked perfectly healthy, except for its eyes. They were empty, like all the life had been sucked right out of them. I got out of my truck, and the cold hit me like a slap in the face. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked over to the wolf. After 15 years of working these mountains, I thought I'd seen it all. I was wrong. That's when I heard it, a howl unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It almost sounded human. Then another joined in, and another. Soon the whole night was filled with these weird howls that made my skin crawl. I looked up at that big full moon, remembering what the local people called February's moon, the hunger moon. They said it was the hardest time of winter, when food was scarce and wolves grew desperate. But these wolves hadn't died from hunger. I didn't know it then, but that night was just the beginning of a nightmare that would change everything. My name is David Cooper, and this is the story of how I discovered what really happens during the hunger moon. The next morning, I drove to see Sarah Whitefeather. She's one of the oldest people in our town and knows all the old stories about these mountains. Her little wooden cabin always smells like burning sage, and she makes the best pine needle tea I'd ever tasted. As she poured the tea with shaky hands, I could tell something was bothering her. I was afraid this would happen, she said quietly, her eyes looking worried. The signs have been everywhere. The birds stopped singing last week, and the deer all ran south too early. He's waking up. Who's waking up? I asked, wrapping my cold hands around the warm cup. Sarah sat down heavily in her old rocking chair. The wolf spirit. We call him Manitou Amarok. Long ago, when winters were harder than now, he would take over wolf packs to help them survive. But he wasn't satisfied with just hunting animals. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. He made the wolves hunt people. I thought about those dead wolves I'd found. The wolves that died. Their spirits weren't strong enough for him to use, she nodded. But the ones that lived, they're his now. They'll think like humans but hunt like wolves, and they're just getting started. I wanted to think it was just an old story, but those weird howls from last night kept playing in my head. How did people stop him before? Silver, she said. The stories say Silver burns his spirit away, but using it, she looked down at her tea. A lot of brave people died to stop him last time. As I drove back to my ranger station, snow started falling again. I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was right. Something evil was out there in my woods, and it was getting stronger. That night, 5 hunters went missing up in the North Woods. I joined the search team, but deep in my gut, I already knew what we'd find. The hunters' camp was torn apart, but not in a normal way. The tents weren't just ripped. They were cut open exactly where the weak spots would be. The supplies weren't scattered randomly. They were spread out like someone had planned it. And the wolf tracks. They formed perfect circles around the camp, like soldiers surrounding their target. "This isn't right," whispered Deputy Wilson, pointing his flashlight at bloody marks in the snow. "Look at these tracks." The wolves split into groups. They drove those men right where they wanted them. We found two of the hunters' bodies about half a mile away. I won't describe what we saw. It still gives me nightmares. But I can tell you this: wolves usually kill to eat. These kills weren't about food. They were about something else, something that felt almost like revenge. The third hunter showed up later, barely alive. Before he died at the hospital, he kept mumbling about the wolves' eyes, how they glowed green and looked too smart, too human. The other two hunters we never found at all. That night, I heard the howls again, but this time they sounded different, like they were laughing, like they were proud of what they'd done. I sat in my truck, listening to those horrible sounds, and knew things were about to get much worse. These weren't normal wolves anymore. There was something else, something that understood how humans think. And they were just getting started. The next few days were like a bad dream that wouldn't end. More people died, a group of hikers, two loggers, even a family in their cabin deep in the woods. The wolves were getting smarter with each attack. They figured out how to cut phone lines by chewing through them in just the right spots. They would chase people away from their cars. Worst of all, they started setting traps. Some wolves would chase people right into the jaws of others hiding and waiting. I couldn't sleep. Every night, I sat up reading the old books Sarah had given me about the wolf spirit. The story was always the same. It would take over the wolves during the hunger moon, make them kill more and more people, and wouldn't stop until everyone in the area was dead. We tried everything to stop them. Guns didn't work. The wolves were too smart, too quick. They dodged the bullets like they knew they were coming. Police cars and bright lights didn't scare them anymore. Even when we sent out a big group of armed men to hunt them down, only half came back. One night, as I listened to those terrible howls getting closer to town, I remembered what Sarah had said about Silver. The wolves were learning from every kill, getting stronger each day, and we still had 2 weeks left of the hunger moon. I looked at the calendar on my wall, marked with red X's counting down to the full moon's end. That's when I realized, if someone didn't stop these wolves soon, there wouldn't be anyone left in town to save. I knew what I had to do. At the Forest Service depot, we kept bags of silver nitrate for testing water samples. It would burn my skin, but it was my only chance. I spent all day getting ready. I got fresh deer meat and soaked it in the silver solution. My hands were red and stinging, but I didn't care. I had to stop these wolves before they killed anyone else. As the sun started to set, I drove deep into the woods where the wolves hunted most. I knew they'd come for me. They'd gotten a taste for human blood now. My rifle wouldn't help much. This had to be up close and personal. The howls started just after dark. I saw yellow eyes glowing between the trees, but they weren't normal wolf eyes. They looked old, smart, and full of hate. I scattered the poisoned meat in a circle around me. "Come on," I whispered. "Come get it." They came out of the shadows. 15 huge wolves, moving together like they'd practiced it. Their leader was a massive black wolf with eyes that glowed bright green. But something funny happened. Instead of attacking me, they went straight for the meat. Even with their human-like smarts, they couldn't fight a wolf's basic nature. Never pass up fresh meat. Then it started to rain. The wolves began shaking and crying out as the silver burned them. The big black wolf looked right at me, and I saw something ancient and evil in its eyes. The rain got harder, mixing with the silver nitrate. The wolves started screaming, not like animals, but almost like people. I fell to my knees as the silver rain burned my skin. I knew I was going to die, but at least I was taking these monsters with me. The last thing I saw was the black wolf's body turning to smoke that floated up toward the moon. Then everything went dark. They found me the next morning, surrounded by 15 dead wolves. The doctor said it was chemical poisoning that nearly killed me, but Sarah and the tribal elders knew better. They still tell stories about that hunger moon and how the wolves never hunted humans again. Sometimes on cold winter nights, people say they hear strange howls in those mountains. Not quite wolf, not quite human. But that's all they are now, just howls in the dark. I never thought I'd have to destroy my life's work, but when you discover something that could end humanity, there's really only one choice. It all started 3 weeks ago at Lake Morrison. I was setting up my mobile lab by the shore, watching the morning mist roll over the dark water. 3 people had drowned there in the past month, all expert swimmers. The local police were stumped, and that's why they called me. Dr. Chen, we found another one, Sheriff Cooper said, walking up behind me. His face was pale. This one's different. I'm a marine biologist. I study weird things that live in water. The stranger, the better. But nothing in my 15 years of research could have prepared me for what I saw in that body bag. The victim, a local swimming coach named Mike, didn't look like he drowned. His skin had a weird greenish tint, and there were dark lines spreading under his skin like black veins. When I cut into a tissue sample, something moved. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with normal lake creatures anymore. I should have called for backup right then. Should have shut everything down and run. But curiosity is a scientist's weakness, and mine would cost me everything. Little did I know, as I peered through my microscope that first morning, that I was looking at something that would change our understanding of life itself. And not in a good way. The lab was quiet except for the hum of my equipment. Through my microscope, I watched the black strands in Mike's tissue sample pulse and twist. They weren't just moving, they were alive. I ran every test I knew. The thing in Mike's body wasn't like any parasite I'd ever seen. It had tiny hooks that dug into nerve endings, like it was trying to control the host body. Even scarier, it was growing. That night, something happened that still gives me nightmares. The morgue called. Mike's body was gone. The security cameras showed only static, and the guards swore no one had entered or left. I drove to the morgue, my heart pounding. Inside, I found wet footprints leading from the freezer to the back door. They looked like someone had walked barefoot through black oil. The trail led straight to the lake. Standing at the water's edge with my flashlight, I saw something break the surface, just for a second. It looked like a hand, but the fingers were too long, too dark. The water rippled, then went still. Back in my lab, under the microscope, the parasite sample had changed. It wasn't just surviving outside its host, it was evolving. And somehow, I knew it was getting smarter. I called the CDC, but they said they'd need more evidence. If only they'd listened. Maybe then we could have stopped what came next. I remember thinking, as I watched the black water lap at the shore, some things should stay in the dark. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. But it was too late. The lake had already given up its secret. A week after Mike's body disappeared, they found Sarah Ellis. She was a local fisherman's daughter, just 23. But what was left of her didn't look human anymore. Her chest, it looked like something had burst out from inside. Black veins covered her skin, and her eyes were clouded over like dirty ice. I'd seen enough wildlife attacks to know this wasn't an animal. This was something worse. That's when the reports started coming in. A night guard at the marina said he saw someone walking into the lake at 3 a.m. Said their movements were all wrong, like a puppet on strings. When police checked the security footage, they saw Sarah, 3 days after we found her body. I followed the trail to a hidden cove. The water there was different, thicker, darker. My equipment picked up strange readings, like the parasites were talking to each other. They were working together, spreading, waiting. Testing showed the parasites could survive in any water, not just the lake. They could live in pipes, in drinking water, in rain. One drop was all it took to start an infection. I worked through the night, watching more samples. The parasites weren't just controlling dead bodies anymore. They were changing them, making them stronger, making them hunt. That's when I heard it, a splash outside my lab. Then another, and another. They were coming out of the water, and they were coming for us. I locked myself in the lab as dark figures emerged from the lake. Through the window, I counted 6, no, 7 bodies. Each one moved with jerky steps, water dripping from their blackened skin. I recognized them all, the missing swimmers, Sarah, Mike. My assistant Tom didn't make it inside in time. I watched, horrified, as they caught him. The parasites burst from their host's mouths like black ribbons, wrapping around him. His screams still haunt me. Then my phone rang. It was a government agent. They'd been watching my research. They didn't want to stop the parasites. They wanted to control them. Think of the potential, he said. An army that can't die. But he didn't understand. The latest test showed something terrifying. The parasites weren't just spreading, they were evolving faster than anything I'd ever seen. Soon, they'd be able to survive in any water source on Earth. Through my lab window, I watched Tom stand up. His eyes were black now. He smiled at me, but it wasn't his smile anymore. The thing wearing his face pressed against the glass, and I saw the parasites moving under his skin. They were scratching at the doors, trying to get in, trying to make me one of them. I had to stop this, no matter the cost. My hands shook as I looked at my research data one last time. The parasites could spread through any water, rain, tears, even morning dew. If they reached the ocean, it would be the end of everything. I had a choice to make. The infected were breaking through the door. Soon they'd get my research, and the government would use it to make weapons. I couldn't let that happen. I grabbed the emergency gas line and broke it open. The smell filled the lab. Then I took out my lighter, the one my dad gave me when I got my PhD. Sometimes he'd said, "You have to destroy something to save everything else." Through the cracking door, I saw their black eyes, their twisted smiles, the parasites writhing under their skin. My research samples were the only proof they existed. Without them, no one could recreate this horror. I heard the glass break, felt cold, wet hands grab my lab coat. I flicked the lighter. The explosion lit up the night sky. The lake burned orange, then black. They never found my body or the bodies of the infected. The lake is closed now. But sometimes on quiet nights, people say they see dark shapes moving under the water, waiting. My name is Dr. Lisa Chen, and this is my last report. Some mysteries should stay buried. Some waters should stay dark. The end. I never thought insects could scream. But here I am, listening to their collective shriek as they burst from what used to be my research assistant's body. I should start from the beginning, though. People need to know what happened here in the Amazon, in case I don't make it out alive. 3 weeks ago, I was just Dr. Mark Zhang, a bug scientist studying why fire ants in the rainforest were acting weird. My team was small, just me, Sarah, my assistant, and Paolo, our local guide. We noticed the ants were getting aggressive, attacking things they normally wouldn't. But that wasn't the strangest part. One morning, Paolo showed us something that changed everything. All the insects, not just ants, but every single bug in our research area, were moving toward the same spot deep in the jungle. It was like they were being called. We followed them. The jungle got darker and quieter with each step. No bird songs, no monkey calls, just silence and the soft crunch of dead leaves under our feet. That's when Paolo fell through what we thought was solid ground. Below was a cave, older than anything we'd ever seen. The walls were covered in paintings that made my stomach turn. Pictures of people with insects coming out of their mouths, their eyes, their ears. And in the middle of it all was this huge figure, like a queen. I reached out to touch one of the paintings. My hand came back covered in this weird, shimmering dust. It looked alive somehow, moving in my flashlight beam. I tried to wipe it off, but it seemed to sink right into my skin. That's when the buzzing started, not from outside the cave, but from inside my own head. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of our nightmare. Sarah started acting strange the next morning. She kept scratching her arms where the dust had touched her, saying it felt like something was moving under her skin. I told her it was probably just an allergic reaction, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The buzzing in my head got louder. It wasn't like normal insect noise. It had a pattern, almost like words. When I closed my eyes, I could see strange images, dark tunnels, thousands of eggs, and a massive queen insect sleeping deep underground. Paolo noticed it too. The forest is wrong. He kept saying, "The animals are leaving." He was right. Every day, more insects appeared around our camp, but all other wildlife had disappeared. They knew something we didn't. Then we found it, a chamber deeper than the first one. Inside was something that still haunts my nightmares. A preserved body, much larger than a normal human. Its skin was like an insect shell, and even after thousands of years it seemed alive. That's when Sarah started coughing. At first, it was just a tickle in her throat. Then she coughed up something that looked like a tiny egg. Her eyes went wide with fear. "Mark," she whispered. "I can hear her. The queen. She's waking up." The buzzing in my head turned into a roar. All around us, the insects began to move as one. Sarah fell to her knees, her skin rippling like something was trying to break free from inside. I wanted to help her, but Paulo grabbed my arm. "We can't," he said. "It's already too late." He was right. Whatever was happening to Sarah wasn't human anymore, and soon it would happen to us too. What happened to Sarah still gives me nightmares. Her skin started bubbling up, like something was pushing from the inside. She screamed for help, but all I could do was watch. Paulo locked her in one of our storage tents, but we could still hear everything. First came the sounds of cracking, like twigs snapping, but it was her bones shifting. Then the buzzing started. It came from inside her, getting louder and louder. Through the tent's walls, I could see her shadow twisting in impossible ways. "We need to radio for help," I told Paulo. But when we tried, all we got was static and this weird clicking sound, like thousands of tiny mandibles chattering. The insects around our camp were going crazy. They formed perfect circles around Sarah's tent, all moving in sync. Some even started building structures I'd never seen before, not nests, but something else, something organized. Then Sarah's screaming stopped. The silence was worse than any sound I'd ever heard. Paulo touched his neck where a small bump was forming. "Mark," he whispered, "I can feel them. They're inside me too." I looked at my own arms. Small bumps were appearing under my skin, moving like ripples on water. The queen's voice in my head was getting stronger, singing a song of transformation and rebirth. We were all becoming part of something bigger, something ancient, something hungry. The hive was waking up. The infection spread faster than we could have imagined. Paulo started changing first. His eyes turned black, and his skin cracked open like dry earth. Small insects crawled out, but they weren't like any bugs I'd seen before. They had a purpose. They knew what they were doing. I tried calling for help on our satellite phone one last time. Instead of a dial tone, I heard the queen's song coming through the speaker. She was in the electronics now too. We were cut off completely. Through the trees, I could see smoke from the nearest village. They were already infected. The queen's children were spreading, building new hives in human hosts. At night, I could see people walking into the forest with stiff, jerky movements, like puppets on strings. My own body was fighting the change, but just barely. Every hour, the bumps under my skin grew bigger. Sometimes I could feel tiny legs scratching inside. The queen's voice kept getting louder, telling me to give in, to become part of her new colony. That's when I realized something terrifying. We weren't dealing with just any infection. This was planned. The queen had been waiting for thousands of years, and we were just the beginning. If this spread beyond the forest, no one would be safe. I knew what I had to do. There was only one way to stop this. They say fire purifies all things. I sure hope they're right. I found the gas cans near our research vehicles. My hands were shaking as I poured them out, making a circle around the ancient chamber. The queen's voice screamed in my head, but I kept going. Paulo and Sarah, or what used to be them, were coming closer. Their bodies were barely human now, covered in moving bumps and leaking insects from every opening. Behind them, more infected people from the village stumbled forward. "I'm sorry," I whispered, striking the match. The fire caught fast in the dry forest. The queen's shriek became deafening as flames surrounded her chamber. The infected tried to stop me, but they couldn't cross the fire. I watched as the insects inside them tried to escape, only to be caught in the heat. One by one, they fell. My own skin was burning, both from the fire and from the creatures trying to burst out, but I had to make sure it was done. I walked into the flames towards the chamber where it all began. The queen's voice finally stopped as the fire reached her ancient body. In those last moments, as the forest burned around me, I felt peace. The infection would die with us. If you find this recording, burn everything. Burn it all. Some things should stay buried forever. End recording. I never thought I'd die here in the Arctic, but as I write these final notes, the creature that killed my team is trying to break through the lab door. I need to tell you what happened, so you'll understand why this place must stay buried in ice forever. It started 3 weeks ago. I was in my usual spot by the big window of Research Station Delta, watching the last sunset we'd see for the next 6 months. Up here, winter means total darkness, what we call the polar night. I'd spent 5 years studying weather patterns at this station, but something felt wrong this time. Dr. Volkov, Anna, James, my young assistant, came running into the lab. His face was pale. You need to see this. He showed me the readings from our equipment that detects movement under the ice. The patterns were all wrong. Earthquakes make specific patterns, like jagged lines. Ice movements look different too. But this looked like something was moving around on purpose. I called everyone to the main lab. There were 5 of us. Me, James, Sarah, our weather expert, Marcus, who fixed everything, and Eric, who studied Arctic animals. As I tried explaining the weird readings, the lights started flickering. Just generator problems, Marcus said, but I could tell he was worried too. That night, we heard it for the first time, a deep rumbling that made our teeth hurt. Sarah checked our heat cameras and spotted something terrifying, a hot shape moving through the freezing snow, leaving strange ice crystals behind it. None of us knew then that this was just the beginning, that in 3 weeks, I'd be the only one left, that the thing out there would learn to copy our voices, our memories, even our faces. But now I hear it breaking through. It's using James's voice to beg me to open the door. I won't. I know what I have to do to stop it. This is Dr. Anna Volkov's warning. If you find this station, leave it buried, because what's frozen in the ice isn't dead. It's waiting. Eric died on a Tuesday. He was just checking the outdoor sensors, something we'd done hundreds of times before. I was watching him through the station's cameras when it happened. Beautiful aurora tonight, he said through the radio. Then he stopped. Wait, what's that in the snow? We all saw it through the camera. Something rose from the ground, like water, but thick and clear. Before we could warn Eric, it split apart into smaller pieces, each about the size of a wolf, then moved so fast. His scream still haunts me. We have to help him. James grabbed his coat, but I held him back. Through the camera, we watched the smaller creatures surround Eric. There was nothing we could do. We spent that night in the main lab, all the doors locked. No one slept. Marcus kept saying it was impossible, that nothing could survive in these temperatures. Sarah just stared at the thermal readings, shaking her head. Then we found Lars. He was our Norwegian weather expert, good at telling when storms were coming. He thought he could make it to the backup station to radio for help. We found him half frozen by the storage shed. But that wasn't what horrified us. It was the way the creature was slowly absorbing him into itself. It's not just killing, Lars whispered before the end. It's learning, taking our memories. I didn't understand what he meant then. I wish I still didn't, because now I know every person it takes makes it smarter, stronger, more like us. The small hunters are still out there, testing our walls, looking for ways in. But they're not really separate anymore. They're all connected, like fingers on a hand. And the hand is getting bigger. Sarah thinks we have 3 days of food left. Marcus is trying to fix the radio, but the creature damaged the antenna. And the polar night is just beginning. No one talks about Eric anymore, or Lars. We can't bear to think about what's left of them out there in the snow as part of that thing. But sometimes, late at night, we hear their voices calling to us from the dark. The polar night came, bringing total darkness. Our world shrank to the main building's fluorescent lights and humming generators. Outside, we could hear them moving. Sarah was the next to go. Our backup generator failed, leaving us in pitch black. She insisted on fixing it herself. I know this station blindfolded, she said, grabbing her toolbox. 10 minutes tops. We counted every second. At 8 minutes, we heard her gasp over the radio. There's something. Oh God, it feels cold. When the lights came back on, the camera showed something bigger than before. The creature had grown, and now it moved differently, more cleverly, like it knew exactly where to go. It has her memories, Marcus whispered. It knows everything Sarah knew about the station. We retreated to the upper floor. Marcus worked day and night, reinforcing windows with metal sheets. James tried reaching anyone on the radio, but all we got was static. The storm outside made rescue impossible. Then the windows started breaking. The creature had figured out how to freeze the glass until it shattered. Marcus ran to fix them, even as James and I begged him to stay back. "I can seal it," he shouted. "I can." The thing that used to be Sarah poured through the crack. We watched, helpless, as it took Marcus too. Now there were only two of us left. But the worst part wasn't the creature getting stronger. It was hearing Sarah's laugh echo through the halls at night, or Marcus' voice calling out, "Hey guys, let me in. It's freezing out here." The thing wasn't just hunting us anymore. It was playing with us. James and I huddled in the inner lab, surrounded by flickering screens. Our food was running low. The creature had us trapped, and it was getting smarter. "Anna, look at this." James pointed to the thermal camera. The smaller hunters were moving in perfect sync, like dancers. They're all connected, sharing one mind. We tried everything to kill it. Fire just made it split apart. Acid couldn't hurt it. Even explosives were useless. It would break into tiny pieces and then come back together, unhurt. But each time we failed, it learned more about us. The worst part was the voices. It would use Eric's voice to tell jokes through the vents. Or Sarah would hum her favorite song while testing our doors. Sometimes Lars would speak in Norwegian, calling for help. That night, something broke through the air vent. I was checking our supplies when I heard James shout, "Run, Anna! Don't look back!" I ran. Behind me, I heard the wet sound of the creature feeding. James screamed once, then went quiet. Now I'm alone, but not really alone, because James is out there now, part of that thing. And it's using his memories to think of ways to reach me. I can hear him now, tapping on my door. "Come on, Anna," he says in that gentle way he used to. "You must be tired. Just let me in." But I won't, because I finally know how to stop it. My hands shake as I write these final notes. I figured it out. The creature's one weakness. Cold, real cold. The kind that freezes everything solid. Sure, it can split apart, but each piece still needs to stay warm to move, to think, to live. I've rigged the station's cooling system to explode. When it blows, it'll release chemicals so cold they'll freeze anything in seconds. The blast will tear open the walls, letting in the Arctic air. At these temperatures, minus 70 degrees, nothing survives. The creature knows I'm planning something. It keeps trying to trick me, using James' voice. "Anna, please, it's not what you think. Let me explain." Then Sarah, "Don't do this. We can study it together." Even little Eric's laugh echoes through the vents. But I know better now. They're gone. And soon, I'll be gone too. But at least I'll take this thing with me. The door's giving way. I can see it seeping through the cracks. Clear like glass, moving like water. Beautiful in a terrible way. I hit the button. The explosion rips through everything. The walls tear open. The air rushes in. I watch, my breath turning to ice as the creature freezes. All its pieces crystallize, like diamonds in the snow. The voices stop, one by one. I'm so cold now, but I'm smiling, because I know this thing will stay frozen forever. If you're reading this, listen carefully. Leave this station buried. Leave us in the ice, because the thing out there isn't dead. It's waiting. Dr. Anna Volkov, Arctic Research Station Delta. Last survivor,